What's up everyone? In this video, we're going to learn how to log a user in with the Twitch API using PHP. We will be adding a login with Twitch button to our login page. When the user clicks on that button, the user is prompted to authorize our app with their Twitch account. When they click authorize, they will be redirected back to our website and logged in as that user. If I log out and log in again with Twitch, this time it will just refresh and log them in because I've already authorized the app. So we do not need to see that dialog anymore. Before we start coding, we're going to need to create ourselves a Twitch app. We're going to head over to dev.twitch.tv. Click on the Your Console button under the Applications section. Click Register Your Application. We're going to give ourselves an application name. Then we're going to specify the redirect URL. After the user clicks authorize, they're going to be redirected back to this login.php file right here on my local host. Select the category. This is website integration. Confirm you're not a robot and click create. Now our app shows up in our console right here. We can manage it and update our settings. Down at the bottom here, the two important things are the client ID and the client secret. We will be using these to communicate with the API and make API calls on behalf of this app. Now we can start coding. I'm going to be continuing with my EasyCodeIs repository. You can find that on GitHub, github.com/jstolpe. Check it out. There are also video tutorials for everything you see in the EasyCodeIs repository on my YouTube channel. There's an EasyCodeIs playlist. Check that out and don't forget to subscribe. The first file we're going to update is our config file and store our client ID and our client secret that we just created in our app. The config file is actually outside of the repository. It is up 2 folders in our EasyCodeIs includes. Here's our config file where we store server-specific defines. This way it's outside of the repo. If you guys want to learn more about how it's all set up, go check out the repository and check the README. In this config file at the bottom, we're going to add our new Twitch defines. So I'm going to head back to my app and copy those 3 things. First, I'm going to copy the redirect URL that we specified and place that in our Twitch redirect URI define. Then I'm going to copy my client ID, and that is our Twitch client ID define. Last but not least, client secret. We're going to generate a new secret here. It's going to say, are you sure? Yes. Then we're going to copy that and save that in our Twitch client secret define. Now we can call these 3 things anywhere in our code. We're done with the config file. Next, I'm going to open my login.php file. This is our redirect URL and our login page. I need to add a Twitch button here. I'm going to copy my login with Twitter button, and we're going to paste that section, and we're going to call this login with Twitch. We don't have a login URL yet, so I'm going to put a placeholder there. Then we need to make our Twitch button look like a Twitch button with the Twitch colors. So we'll do a new class for the Twitch button and the Twitch button container. That means I have to add a few new styles. For our Twitch button container, I just copied over the Facebook one, and I'm going to update the color for the Twitch background to the Twitch color, and then we want to make a little different color on hover, so I'm going to give it that background. Back on my login.php page, if I refresh it, we should see our login with Twitch button. There it is. It has the Twitch colors. We're done with our global.css file. I'm going to close that. Now over in my repository, EasyCodeIs, I'm going to go into the PHP folder, and I'm going to create a new file called Twitch API. In this file, we're going to create a class for Twitch, and it's going to handle all of our communication to the Twitch API. So the first thing we have to do is define our class. In our class, we're going to want to store a few variables. We're going to store the client ID, the client secret, the access token, and the refresh token. Then we want to define a few constants. These are going to be the base domains for the Twitter API. The Twitter ID domain is the base domain for getting an access token. The Twitter API domain is the base domain for actually hitting the API endpoints and getting data back. Those are our class variables. Then we can define our constructor. Our constructor function is going to take in a client ID, a client secret, and an access token if we have one. Then we're going to set these parameters to our class variables. Now our class is set up just enough to be able to instantiate it. In our login.php file, before our login redirect function is called, we're going to set up a new class. Here's where we're going to pass in our client ID and our client secret. At this point, we do not have an access token, so the class will be instantiated with no access token because we haven't gotten one yet. Which brings us to the next line, and this should be called Twitch, not Twitter. Getting those two mixed up. With our new class, we're going to create a function called getLoginURL. And here is where we pass in our Twitch redirect URI, also which we defined in our config.php file. In our class now, we're going to want to create a getLoginURL function. Here's our function, and we're passing in our redirect URI. This is going to return a string, which is the URL that we are going to place in our A tag right here for the href. This will send the user to Twitch and prompt them with the authorization dialog. First, I'm going to define the endpoint. And the endpoint for authorization is our Twitter ID domain, and the path auth2/authorize. Then we need the parameters. Here we're specifying the client ID, which was set when we instantiated the class, redirect URL coming in through our function. The response type is code. We're going to get a code back when the user clicks the authorize button, and then we have to use that code to exchange it for an actual access token. The scope here specifies that we want to get the user's email because we're going to need that to look them up in our database, and then the state. The state here is just going to be a random generated string that I'm going to save on my end as well in the session. This is just to verify that the user has actually came to our website first, went to Twitch, and then came back. When they come back after clicking authorize, we're going to make sure that our session Twitch state matches what Twitch sends us back. Whatever you put in for the state, Twitch will send it back to you when the user authorizes your app. This way, every time the user comes to our login page, a new state will be generated. Then we return our URL, tagging on all these params as variables to our endpoint. That's our login URL for Twitch. Back in our login.php file, this will return us the string we need to put in the A tag. Set this to a variable, Twitch login URL. Then that variable is going to get echoed out right here. Now, before we try this out, we need to make sure that we're auto-loading our new class. I'm going to open up the autoloader, and at the bottom, I'm going to include Twitch API functions by including our twitch_API.php file. Now our Twitch, oh, this is spelled wrong. Make sure you spell it right. Now my file name matches my include. Autoload is done. Let's check out our website. Now our login button has a URL associated with it. If I click on login with Twitch, I should be taken to Twitch, and the app we just created is prompting us to authorize. Here's my new app. Here's my Twitch account, and it's telling me that it's going to obtain my email address. I'm fine with that. I'm going to click authorize. I'm redirected back to our web page, and now in the URL, here's the code. This is what we're going to use to exchange to get an access token, the scope, and the state. That is that random string we generated and saved before the user went to Twitch, and they passed it back to us. Now in our login.php file, we need to catch the user in case they're coming back from the authorization page. And to do that, we're going to check for a code, and we're going to check our state variable in the URL. This if statement right here will catch the user if they're coming from Twitch, and we know that because there's going to be a code in the URL, there's going to be a state in the URL, and then we're going to verify that that state matches our Twitch state. If that is true, we know they're coming from Twitch, and we can proceed to try to get an access token with the code in the URL. Instantiate our class again with our client ID and our client secret. Then we are going to try to log the user in with the code. We need to create ourselves a new function in our class called try and log in with Twitch. Then that function is going to take in the code that we just got back from Twitch and the redirect URI. The first step to logging the user in is getting an access token. We need the access token to be able to hit the user's endpoint and get their email address back. In order to get the access token, we need to exchange the code that we just got back for an access token. So the first thing we're going to do is get ourselves an access token. The endpoint for getting an access token has the same base domain, OAuth2, but this time we do /token. Then we need to specify our API params. This endpoint right here is a post. Parameters that it requires is the client ID and the client secret, which we set when we instantiated the class, the code, which we got back from Twitch, the redirect URI that we're using, and we have to specify a grant type of authorization code. This tells Twitch we want an access token in exchange for our code. With our API params array, we're going to pass that along to a make API call function, which is going to be a generic function where we can make curl requests with PHP to the endpoint that we specify with the URL params that we specify. Since we're making a curl call, we need to define some options for our curl call. We're going to specify our endpoint, cert info, path to cert is also in our config file, return transfer true, verify true, and verify host. So those are the base curl options. Then we have to do some curl options based on the method type. In this case, it's a post. We need to set our post to true, and we need to define the post fields. Then we can start our curl call. We have created our curl call, set the curl options, we got the API response back, and then we JSON decoded the API response. Now all we have to do is return our response. We're going to return a custom array here so we can do some checks for if there were errors or not. Give ourselves a status, a message, the actual API response data, the endpoint we used, and the URL params that we used. If there is an error, there will be a status array key set in the API response. If it is set, I'm going to set the status to fail. If there's no status key in the API response, we know our status is okay. Same thing goes for the message. Check if there was a message, we're going to return the message. If there wasn't and it was okay, then we're just going to return an empty string. Then we want to return our response data, the endpoint that we used, and our URL params. That is our make API call function. This array right here will be returned back right here in our get Twitch access token function, which gets returned back to our try and log in with Twitch function and stored in the access token variable. This is a good place to take a break and dump out our access token to see if our code's working. If all goes well, we will fall into our if statement, try to log in, get an access token, and we will see it on the screen. On my login page, I'm going to log in with Twitch and hit the authorize button. It worked. Here's the array that we defined in our make API call function. We got our status, our message, the API data with an access token. This tells me when the access token expires, a refresh token, which we can use to get a new access token when this one expires. The code we get back is a one-time use code to get an access token. After we have our access token, we can try to get the user's info. Our try and login with Twitch function is going to return an array, and it's going to contain the status and the message. If our status is okay, then we get our user information. Since we got back our access token, we want to make sure we update our class variable with the access token as well as the refresh token. And our access token is in our API data access token. Our refresh token is also in our API data refresh token. Here is where we are going to create our get user info function. Like our other API call functions, we're going to start by defining our endpoint. We're going to use our Twitter API domain, not the ID domain. And the endpoint for getting a user's info is users. Then we define our API params for this endpoint. This endpoint is a GET request. The URL params for this request we're going to leave empty. The way Twitch knows what user to get the information for is because it's encoded in the access token that we got back. And we're going to pass that along in the header. When we're hitting the Twitter API domain, we need to pass along headers. The headers include the authorization token and the client ID. All we're going to do here is return an array. This array is going to contain the headers that we need for any calls going forward. The header requires the client ID and the authorization bearer and then the access token. This is what we will set the headers to when we make our curl call. Now we're going to have to modify our make API call a bit because we have a new type and we have to deal with the authorization headers that we just set up. In our make API call function, we're going to check for authorization in the params that are coming in. If there's authorization, then we need to specify some curl options so that the headers get passed along. We specify that we want to pass along headers, and we set the headers to the authorization array that is coming from our get authorization headers function. Then we're going to handle our get method. In case of a get method, we have to append on our URL params to the endpoint that is passed in. After that, we need to handle our response a little differently, depending on if there's authorization headers or not. If there is authorization, we have to do a little bit more work to get the response. When we have authorization, we're going to get headers back and the body. We're going to get the size of the header, then we're going to remove the header from the response, which leaves us only the body, and then we can JSON decode the body. Then we have our API response. Now our make API call is set up to handle get and post requests. We are at a good stopping point where we need to check our work. Now we can get the user's information, and if all goes well, we should see our user's info spit out on the page after we log in with Twitch. Log in with Twitch, it should automatically come back to my website since I've already authorized, and it looks like it worked. We've gotten my user info. Here is the API data, which is the response data from Twitch, and this is the user's info that I got back. My login, my display name, description, profile image URL, offline image URL, the view count, and my email address for my Twitch account. We know our get user info is working. Now I'm going to set the status in the message equal to the user info status and the user info message, just in case something goes wrong. Then we will be returning the correct status and the correct message. If the status we get back from getting the user's info is okay, then we can go ahead and log our user in. Apart from being okay, we want to make sure that we actually have user info. I'm looking here at the API data, and this array here. We're just going to make sure that we have a user in our data array. And if we do, we're going to log the user in with Twitch. And in, we are going to pass that first user. In our log user in with Twitch function, we want to make sure that we're storing all the info we need in the session. I'm storing the user info that we got back from the API. I'm adding on the access token, the refresh token. I'm setting a Boolean flag here. Later will tell us if the user actually needs to enter their password on our website in order to connect their account. We'll get to that in a little bit. Before we go any further, we're going to update our database. We need to add on 3 new columns. Over in PHP My Admin, in my easy code is database, users table. I'm going to click on the structure. We're going to be adding 3 columns at the end of the table. Twitch user ID, Twitch access token, and Twitch refresh token. Save that and go back to the structure. Now we have 3 new columns in our database. After our session stuff is set, I'm going to try and look the user up in our database with their Twitch ID. Here I'm getting from the users table where the Twitch user ID equals the Twitch user's ID that we just got back from the API. I'm also going to look the user up with their email address that we got back. Here I'm getting from the table users where column email address equals the email address that we just got back from the API. Now we can set up our if-else statements to determine how to proceed with the user. If we found the user with the Twitch user ID, we obviously can log them in. We have the user in our database. Or if we found the user with the email and they do not have a password set, this means they have logged in with Twitch before because they have never set a password. If they had a password, they would have signed up on our website through our sign-up process. If we found them with an email address and they do not have a Twitch user ID set, we have to set our session here to true. This is telling us that there's already an account with an email address that we got back from Twitch. However, that user row in our database does not have a Twitch user ID, so somebody else has already signed up with that email address. And to continue, we're going to ask them to enter the password for our website, EasyCodeIs, and then log in to connect their Twitch to their EasyCodeIs account. Else here is straightforward. We didn't find anything, so we're just going to sign them up and log them in. We're going to start out here in our if statement, and we're going to get the user ID. The user ID is going to be whatever variable here returned info from our database. We know the user ID, so we can update them with our Twitch user ID, Twitch access token, and the Twitch refresh token. Here I'm calling an update for each of the columns: Twitch user ID, Twitch access token, and Twitch refresh token. When the user gets logged in, the info we got back from Twitch will be updated to those 3 columns in our database. Once the user has been updated, I'm going to get their info again from the users table. Now we have the most updated user info. With that user info, I am going to set the session variables so that the user is logged in. We specify is logged in equals true, and then we save the user info into the session. Last but not least is where we have to sign the user up and log them in. We're going to call our signup function. We're going to save the user's email that we got back from Twitch. I'm going to set their first name equal to the display name that we got back from Twitch. We do this because Twitch does not provide us with a first and last name, so we're going to leave the last name blank, and we're just going to put their display name in as their first name. Then we're going to store their Twitch user ID, the access token, and the refresh token. On the next line, we call our sign user up function. And in that function, we pass along our sign up user info array. I'm going to open up the functions.php file. In this file is our sign user up function. We have to modify this function now because we have added on new columns to our table. Inserting, we got to account for our Twitch user ID, our Twitch access token, and our Twitch refresh token. Then we have to add those onto our values as well. And our statement has been prepared. After we've added them onto our prepare statement, we have to add them onto our execute statement, where we actually have to assign the values that we're passing in. We're going to check for is set on each of these because the signup function is called in many places, and the only time we have the Twitch information is if we're coming from Twitch. Here we're checking for the user ID. If it's set, then we use it. Otherwise it's blank. Same with the access token, and the same with the refresh token. Sign up user function inserts a row for the user into the table, and then returns us the ID that was inserted for that user. Then we're going to do the exact same thing we did here in our first if statement. Get the user info with the new user ID that we created. Then we're going to log them in by specifying is logged in true and saving the user info to our session. Back in our login.php file, all we have to handle is our special case where we need the user to enter their password. To do that, we're going to add another if statement here, just like we did for Facebook and Twitter. Here's where our long session variable, Boolean, comes into play. If this is set and it's true, then we're going to display the message, an account already exists with that email address. To connect your Twitch account, enter your password. Then we come to the email address input field. In the case that we display this message, we want to pre-populate the email field with the email address that we got back from Twitch. Just like we do for Facebook and Twitter, we're going to put an else if here for Twitch. We're checking the session Twitter user info email address. If it exists, and if there's an email address, then we set the input email equal to that email address. This input email variable gets echoed out inside of the value for the input. All we have left to do is update our process login.php file. If the user is prompted with that message and does manually log in with their EasyCode is credentials, we have to make sure to update their row and save their Twitch info. Back in our Twitch API, in this else if, we have not saved the Twitch user's info yet. And we don't do any of that here because we want to make sure that the user can verify themselves by entering their EasyCode is password. This is why we save these things to the session. Now, in our process login.php file, once they have successfully entered their password and we validate them, we can update their Twitch info. If there's Twitch user info in the session, we are going to update their Twitch user ID, their access token, and their refresh token, and log them in. Before we test this out, in order to hit this special case, we need to make sure we have a password entered, and we don't have a Twitch user ID. In this case, it's going to say, hey, an account already exists with that email address. Please enter your password to connect your Twitch ID to your EasyCode account. Before I log in, I'm going to disconnect my Twitch account from my app. Head over to your settings on Twitch, click the Connections tab, scroll down, and we should see our app. Here's our app. Clicking this button and disconnecting the app means that the dialog box will be prompted to us when we click Login with Twitch. I click the button, I get the authorization dialog, I click Authorize, it's going to redirect me back, and it fell into our special case, where it already found an account with that email address, so we want to verify that this is the same user. I'm going to enter my password, and I'm going to click Login. Our process login script logged us in, and it saved our credentials to our new columns. Refresh my PHP my admin users table, scroll over, and now I have a Twitch user ID, an access token, and a refresh token. Back over here on Twitch, if I refresh my connections, I will see my Easy Code is app is back here. If I log in again, I will not get the authorization dialog box. I've already connected my Twitch account to my Easy Code is account, and I'm logged in. And that is how you log a user in with their Twitch account using PHP. That is going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you want to see coded up next. I'll catch you later.